I'm wearing. Don't worry, I'm wearing.
К жителям и просит помочь больницам и пациентам. Нужны и автомобили. Сейчас в команде 95 человек. Анастасия Стерхова, Иван Блинов, Вести, Удмуртия.
Сегодня прояснилась судьба еще одного солдата Великой Отечественной войны. Несколько дней назад Вести рассказывали о красноармейце Николае Пасынкове. Поисковики из отряда «Русь» обнаружили останки уроженца Удмуртии в конце октября в Бельском районе Тверской области. Личность солдата удалось установить по медальону. Нужно было найти родных. За помощью волонтеры-поисковики обратились к нам, и вот уже на следующий день нашлась живущая в Москве родная внучка бойца.
Родственники увидели эту новость и сообщили внучке. Внучка уже нашла наш отряд, и мы с ней созвонились. В ближайшее время родственники решают вопрос с захоронением останков героя на родине, в городе Ижевске.
Все эти годы Николай Пасынков считался без вести пропавшим. Последнее письмо от него семья получила в августе 41-го. В поисковом отряде рассказали, с родными солдата они встретятся на днях. Уже известно, что захоронен он будет в Ижевске рядом со своей супругой. Погибшему солдату в начале войны был 31 год. В Красной армии он прослужил всего месяц. Правила маркировки литературы в России снова могут измениться, а этого ждут школьники и их родители. Что стало поводом пересмотреть существующий подход, расскажем после информации о погоде. Продолжаем выпуск. Правила маркировки литературы могут измениться. Об этом стало известно после заседания Совета по культуре и искусству при президенте России. Там говорили о положении дела и о том, что абсурдность возрастных ограничений мешает нормально работать музеям, театрам, библиотекам, магазинам. Как сегодня старшеклассники обходят запреты, чтобы прочитать книги из школьной программы, узнали корреспонденты «Вестей».
Например, метро 18+, книга продается исключительно в пластиковой упаковке. Король и Шут. Книга содержит ненормативную лексику, поэтому продается тоже в пластике 18+.
Вместе с книгами, которые интересуют взрослеющих подростков, в пластик завернуты и те произведения, которые они должны прочитать по школьной программе. Здесь и «Война и мир» Толстого, и проза Есенина. Сейчас такую литературу детям здесь не продают.
Если речь идет о классике, о каких-то произведениях, которые они проходят в школе, то, как правило, такие книги они покупают вместе с родителями, вместе со списком, который выдается в школе.
Вот и 14-летний Иван Тыченкин, мечтающий стать врачом, сегодня в книжном вместе с мамой. По магазинам самостоятельно ходит с 11 лет, но за энциклопедией вынужден прийти в сопровождении взрослых. Подростка интересует атлас анатомии человека, пометка 16+.
Мне было бы интересно про строение, также, как, возможно, все это выглядит. И узнать информацию, название, для чего это и как создано и функционирует.
Он изучает японскую литературу, изучает химию, биологию, которая на данный момент не подходит ему по возрасту, то есть его интересуют более взрослые книги.
Теперь правила возрастной маркировки произведений литературы могут пересмотреть. Об этом заявил президент России Владимир Путин на заседании Совета по культуре и искусству, где председатель комитета Госдумы Елена Ямпольская доложила, что абсурдно.
Их можно заказать, и там никто ничего не спрашивает.
16-летняя Ксения Дресвяникова все, что ей интересно, находит в бабушкиной библиотеке и в интернете. Родители ребенка поддерживают и считают, что если школьник увлечен и много читает, мешать ему не педагогично. Председатель комитета Госдумы Елена Ямпольская на стороне читающих. Она предложила оставить в строгом виде только маркировку 18+. Но и тут пересмотреть список, а остальные +6, +12, +16 сделать рекомендательными. Валерия Шадрина, Анастасия Стерхова, Иван Блинов, Вести, Удмуртия.
В Ижевском зоопарке новый обитатель. Им стал спасенный в Можгинском районе лебедь-шипун. Он не смог улететь на зимовку из-за врожденной патологии ангельские крылья. Шансов выжить в дикой среде у птицы почти не было, но благодаря активности местных жителей у найденыша теперь есть дом. Это видео пресс-службы зоопарка. Сейчас птица проходит 30-дневный карантин и чувствует себя хорошо. А уже весной лебедя покажут всем посетителям. А вот в Ярушкинском дендропарке сегодня можно побывать, не выходя из дома. У территории появился свой виртуальный 3D-тур. На панорамную съемку и оформление у авторов проекта ушло 3 летних месяца. Что в итоге получилось, увидела Анжелика Ташмухамедова.
Так Ярушкинский дендропарк выглядит летом, пышет зеленью и ярким цветом. А это уже его осеннее состояние. Та же территория, но в 3D формате. Теперь по городскому саду можно совершить виртуальный тур. Нужен только гаджет и интернет.
Можно вбить в
Детство провела тут. Очищали территорию от сухостоя, подрезали ветки. Сейчас у студентки времени на прогулки мало, поэтому путешествуют в основном онлайн.
Там находится 150 панорамных фотографий и 25 метров друг от друга находится. Можно полистать вокруг, оглядеться снизу, сверху, справа, слева. Как будто бы идешь просто по лесу.
Идея создать 3D-тур по Ярушкам появилась год назад. Неравнодушные живчанки понравились подобные проекты из соседних регионов. В июне началась съемка. В объектив спецкамеры попала практически вся территория сада и даже его непроходимые участки.
Мы старались зайти на все биотопы, во всех биотопах побывать и в низинном лугу.
Медова, Артем Пушин. Вести, Удмуртия.
В Ижевске продолжает работу народная ярмарка. Она радует гостей оригинальными товарами из районов Удмуртии и регионов России. Павильон развернулся на перекрестке улиц Удмуртской и Кировой. Здесь можно найти рыбные деликатесы с Дальнего Востока, тамбовское сало, кавказские сыры, миндальную и кедровую халву. Производители нашей республики.
Большое спасибо. Спасибо, садитесь, пожалуйста. Это моя последняя пресс-конференция. Спасибо. На самом деле я очень ценю вашу поддержку. Я хочу поблагодарить американский народ за огромную поддержку. Миллионы человек проголосовали за нас сегодня. И другая группа людей пытается сделать так, чтобы эти люди, которые голосовали за нас, были очернены, и мы этого не потерпим. Я хочу поблагодарить всю мою семью, первую леди, вице-президента Пенса и его супругу за то, что они все были с нами, за то, что они прошли.
Lead here in the state to, I believe, around 21,000. Well, turns out that was an erroneous number that was given out by the registrar here yesterday. That will be the total number for this morning, the 30,000 ballots. There are still overall 63,000 outstanding. The change here today is that we will get a second report. So far, during this process, they've only reported one new ballot dump, for lack of a better term, a day. We're going to get a second one today before 4 o'clock local time, 7 p.m. On the East Coast. And again, there has been some criticism here that for a state that is so consequential, things have been moving relatively slowly. And if I can, just like we did yesterday, Lester, I just want to show you that in the area where the ballot scanner machines are right now, and they are those white things, they look kind of like big printers. Over there, there's another one. These are election observers in the foreground here. Hi, how are you? It doesn't appear that they're actually doing any scanning of the ballots right now. So I don't know if it's a volume issue, a processing issue, that they're not able to go as fast as they would like to. But the reality is, with all of these outstanding ballots, and I'm talking about the mail-in ballots, not even the provisional ballots, that goes beyond the 63,000 number. There are still a lot of ballots to count here because of a staff error. We were told we were going to get 51,000 this morning. It turns out we only ended up getting in the 30,000 neighborhood. But Joe Gloria, the registrar, is continuing his briefing right now, and we hope to continue to get some more information. And we know at least by 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, we'll have a second round of new data coming out of here in Clark County, where Nevada is. All right, Jacob, thanks for walking us through all that. John Ralston's been covering Nevada politics for a very long time, lately for the Nevada Independent. He joins us now. John, what's your understanding of the confusion there between that 51,000 versus 30,000?
Well, my understanding, Lester, is, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, is there's essentially a difference between ballots and cards. Some ballots are longer than others, and they erroneously gave out a number of how many cards there were and not ballots. I have to tell you, as I've been saying here all week, I have great respect for Joe Gloria and the people who run these elections here, but there's clearly been just bad communications, and it allowed the Republicans to raise questions and allowed us in the media to say what the heck is going on. But it looks like they fixed everything now, and I'm glad they're going to be doing 2 reports a day, Lester. But the big news, of course, is what those 30,000 ballots showed, which is what I've been saying, as you know, Lester, that the Democrats won the mail consistently by 2-1 in Clark County. Most of the ballots that are left are in Clark County. Biden's lead has essentially doubled today. The mail ballots essentially showed 2-1 today. They showed the same thing yesterday. And despite what Chuck Tentative Todd is saying, Nevada is over.
Hey, buddy.
You deserve a response.
Look, man, you know, we're not at that 99.5. And, you know, at the end of the day, with a lot of scrutiny that we're all under these days, John, I think you know the cautious nature. And I really think, frankly, we've seen this with all of the folks that not just run election desks, but I'm talking about the folks counting the ballots. There's an extra methodical, deliberate nature. Tell me what's going on in Reno, where there's just not much left out of Washoe County?
Yeah, there's a few hundred ballots that came out today, Chuck, that were updated in that total, and Biden won by a little bit. And you know Nevada as well as anyone who doesn't live here, Chuck. Washoe has been the key in the last few elections here, in the sense that it used to be a Republican county, but now the Democrats are consistently winning here. Hillary Clinton won by about 2,700 votes. Biden has even a bigger lead, as you can see right there, and both Governor Sisolak and Senator Rosen, who were supposedly in very tight races last cycle, both won Washoe County, and that extended their margin. So there's not enough votes left in Washoe to really move the needle that much, not enough left in the rurals either, Chuck. And so all those votes that are left are in Clark County. There's no reason to believe that Biden isn't going to win the rest of those mail ballots by close to 2-1. And then there's about 60,000 or so, I think, provisional ballots, most of which probably will count. These are same-day registrants who got provisional ballots. That was a new law that was passed. The same-day registration ballots in Clark County before now have been pretty even. The Republicans have done a pretty good job, but they have to do much better than even among those. So unless there's something really anomalous going on, there's no way that Trump does anything but lose votes here from now on.
Hey, John, I know when all is said and done, it looks like the margin for Joe Biden is going to look not that dissimilar to what Hillary Clinton got. What'd you learn over the last 4 years? What changed and what didn't?
Well, you know, it's interesting because not a lot really has changed. And you just said it yourself, Chuck. It looks like, again, if the progression continues, that Joe Biden will win the state by about the same margin as Hillary Clinton, about 2.5 percentage points. Now, the Republicans have been doing this since 2008. They've been trying to, figure out how to unlock the Clark County key, which has been everything for the Democrats. As you know, early voting here is usually 2/3 of the vote. The Democrats build up a huge bank of votes, and there's not enough votes left on Election Day. The Republicans thought they had a plan this time that was going to pay off, but it was, especially with what the president and his campaign have been doing, it was reliant on them being slightly ahead on election night. That did not happen. That's when they knew or believed that they had lost the state. You know, Chuck, we're going to have to wait for the exit polls to see if the Latino vote here was down this time, what else happened. Right. But really, not much has changed.
No, the one thing that jumped out in the exit poll, and I'm curious of what you think a Biden administration ought to take away from them when they think about Nevada, is Nevada was one of the few battleground states that said, hey, we'd like to prioritize restarting the economy over containing the virus. Only Ohio was the only other battleground state that I think chose economy over the virus, which to me actually made a lot of sense. What should a Biden, if it indeed is a Biden White House, how should a Biden White House think about this balance that Nevada voters seem to be concerned about?
You know, Chuck, the way you just framed that, and you see those polling results up there, it's the key question for Nevada. The Republicans tried to change that perception here by essentially saying, look, they didn't do what you just said. The governor, who was a Democrat, didn't restart the economy. Steve Sisolak essentially forced the casinos to shut down really early because the coronavirus was so bad here. And that was devastating to the economy because after the casinos, Chuck, there ain't much here when it comes to the economy. And so that was devastating. And so the Republicans jumped on that. They tried to substitute Sisolak for Biden on the ballot, essentially saying if you don't like what the lockdown did to the economy, then vote against Joe Biden and as a proxy for Steve Sisolak. We don't know if that worked, but it was a pretty smart strategy, if you ask me, Chuck. But it's much more nuanced than that, right? Things have been opening up here for quite some time, but there's a lot of people out of work, Chuck, and the unemployment system here has been dysfunctional, so there's a lot of anger. How much that played into this? Again, we have some exit polling data. I want to wait a little bit longer to see how that.
All right, gentlemen, thank you, John. Hallie Jackson at the White House right now. Hallie, you've got some new information.
Well, I want to answer some of the questions, Lester, that you and the panelists have been talking about here regarding the idea of where President Trump's head is at as we look at this race and where things stand currently. And there was this question, right, of if it continues to move in the direction that it's headed in Pennsylvania, and again, NBC News has not called this race. It is still obviously still very active. Would the president concede this? Let me just make a couple of points here. Remember, conceding, that is not a statutory or constitutional mandate. That is a tradition. It is not a requirement by law, Lester. So the one thing we know about this president, he does not hold tradition in high regard in many instances. So there is no indication that he would do so, at least until, according to our sources, after the recounts, the canvassing, the certifications have been completed. The latest deadline for that, I believe, in the 5 states that are still outstanding is December 1st. And I think that's the Wisconsin certification. So there's sort of that piece of things at play here. But I also want to point to, if past is precedent, right, and if the president's past actions provide a roadmap of where he goes from here, I want to flash you back to what was happening at the end of 2016 and early 2017. After Donald Trump had already locked up the Electoral College, he was already president-elect, he was inaugurated, he was president, he still insisted that the popular vote count was not valid, making back then even fraudulent claims of voter irregularity, going so far as to create, do you remember this? The Voter Commission, a presidential commission on election integrity. It ultimately found nothing untoward. It disbanded, I think, in 2018. But even as recently as last year, Chuck, the president was still telling you in that interview you conducted with Meet the Press that he felt like there was still concerns or that it was not accurate, the popular vote count. And I think that speaks to the president's ability to hold on to what he sees as something unfair, his sort of aggrieved sense of things. And so I don't think there is any indication that that is changing in the next couple of months,
Hallie,
if in fact this moves in that direction.
Let me take you back. You went back to 16. I'm going to take you back earlier that year. The Iowa caucuses. That's first time Donald Trump ever faced any set of voters were the Iowa caucuses. He lost. And I just went back to remind, I know what my memory was, but went back to all the headlines were when the Donald Trump side, Donald Trump claims Ted Cruz stole Iowa caucuses with calls. So this is there is a pattern here. When he doesn't, and in fact, I think he lost the Wisconsin primary, also was a big moment. And again, he accused, because everybody piled on him and everybody sort of rallied around him. So he has never accepted any loss as legitimate. He didn't accept the Iowa caucuses as legitimate. He didn't accept, I believe, was it the Wisconsin primary, Indiana primary? My memory is a little foggy right now. He didn't accept the popular vote, as Hallie pointed out. And so history says he's not going to accept this no matter what it is.
There's been a video that's been going viral on social media. I think it was last night. Hillary Clinton in one of the debates making this point to the president back in 2016 when they were debating, saying, you're the person that has, she repeated several instances of the president sticking to his ground.
What's worth noting is that we're talking about it.
Well, and it's Rich Lowry, I thought, pointed out really well. He said he quoted his own column from like 4 years. Like, Donald Trump's pattern is that Donald Trump admitted, yes, I whine sometimes. I whine till I win, was the quote I think that Rich Lowry was paraphrasing there. This Donald Trump's entire career, he has found success basically denying reality.
Well, Hallie, what about
he
that?
Bent the will sometimes of an alternative reality into his reality.
But Hallie, if you're still with us, I mean, we're looking at this Pennsylvania numbers. As you know, we have not called them, but a lot of folks may see the handwriting on the wall. How does the Trump campaign see a path? All right, so you complained about illegal voting. Do they honestly see a way to figure out a win that defies whatever that ultimate electoral vote number is?
I will tell you, Lester, based on my conversations over the past, few hours since the Pennsylvania numbers started coming in increasingly for Joe Biden this morning, I cannot confidently stand here and say that the campaign overall honestly, truly sees a path right now in Pennsylvania based on the ballot numbers that are coming in. What I will say is that I do think that they are gearing up for this legal fight, this legal strategy moving forward, specifically in Pennsylvania, and specifically related to the case that is already in front of the Supreme Court regarding late arriving mail-in ballots. That is where a lot of the focus is right now, because if they're not going to get there based on the count as it stands now, they're hoping to get there based on the courts. But I will say there is real consternation and real frustration and concern that legal strategy is frankly a bit of a mess at the moment. There are those in the president's orbit who are allies, advisors, who are very concerned that there is not clear leadership on that front, that there is not somebody who is acting like, the Ted Olson, if you will, back in 2000 in Florida to try to mount a concerted, clear legal effort on behalf of the Trump campaign. Partly the framing of that, right, to compare what's happening in Pennsylvania to what's happening in Florida is intended to give the Trump campaign an air of legitimacy that doesn't seem to exist based on the legal challenges they've put forward so far, with judges dismissing cases that have already been filed because there's just not evidence to back up what the Trump campaign is saying. I'll also note that, Lester, you and I were talking, 24 hours ago about the lawsuit being threatened to be filed in Nevada. That actually hasn't materialized yet, right? That has not been formally filed by the Trump campaign. These are threats that we are seeing. There is that threat for the Wisconsin recount and others, but at this point, not clear how that legal strategy moves forward for President Trump.
All right, Hallie, thanks. And you kind of teed us up to where we want to go next. Let's take a closer look at the legal questions surrounding this election now with Justice correspondent Pete Williams and Ned Foley, an expert in constitutional law and the director of the election law program at Ohio State University. First to you, Pete. What
phone calls? But as I see it, there are basically only two kinds of lawsuits currently active that could actually affect the vote total. Now, the first one is the one that Hallie was just talking about, the lawsuit in the Supreme Court challenging the state Supreme Court's decision to extend the deadline for mail ballots until Friday. How much of a difference might that make? We can't say until we know how many mail ballots came in between 8 o'clock on Tuesday night and Friday at 5 p.m. So that could be important, maybe not. We'll see how many votes there are. The question is, was the state Supreme Court? And here's the issue. In some counties, at least two counties that we know of, Montgomery County and Northampton County, the officials gave mail voters a chance to come in and fix their ballots if they had a problem with them. If they left off a date, there was some technical problem, they could fix the ballot or cast a provisional ballot. The Republicans say you can't do that under state law. State law doesn't allow that. The Democrats say, well, state law doesn't specifically allow it, but it doesn't specifically prohibit it either. So that's a legal question for the state courts in Pennsylvania to decide. It does seem to me that that lawsuit, while the Supreme Court lawsuit could look back at the votes that were cast in that extended period, these state court lawsuits are only forward-looking. If the courts say, yep, you're right, you can't let people cast a provisional ballot, they would have to stop counting any ballots that they knew of were in that category. But they'll undoubtedly cast a lot of ballots already, and you can't go back and now try to fish them out and figure out which ones they were or who they voted for. And then in Nevada, that's the only other state where there's any active litigation right now, and it's a lawsuit filed by two candidates for Congress who say that in Clark County they should stop using automated equipment to compare the signatures on mail ballots to what's on file. And again, that is also forward-looking because it wouldn't affect any ballots that were already screened. So there are only two states right now, Lester, in which there's active litigation.
And Professor Foley, in any of those cases, would you see a potential major change in the vote totals as we will have known them?
No, I don't see that. It doesn't seem to me that the litigation really is likely to affect the outcome in either of those states.
And so what are the, Hallie raised the issue of there doesn't seem to be a clear-cut legal strategy for the Trump campaign in terms of the nature of the kind of lawsuits. Do they feel scattershot? Is it important that they come up with a kind of a broader strategy?
Yeah, I think in this kind of litigation involving recounts or fights over the counting of votes, you often see litigation filed even if it doesn't have merit, because the candidate that's behind needs to do something, otherwise they're going to stay behind. But often these lawsuits just end up just going away because they lack merit.
All right, Professor Foley and Pete, thank you very much. And Chuck, you had something you want to...
Well, what I have is a perfect example as to why the Biden folks have so much confidence, why we believe when all the votes are counted, Joe Biden's lead continues to expand in Pennsylvania. I want to point out, we just got some numbers out of Crawford County. Crawford County in the Erie, Pennsylvania media market, 37% of them. The point is that we were telling you, all the vote by mail, it didn't matter where vote by mail came from, if it came from a red county or it all leaned heavily Joe Biden. So here is a county where he will overall barely top 30% of the vote. And yet, just now, when he won this most recent one, all of the vote by mail. I mean, we just basically had Republicans voted in person, Democrats voted by mail. So at the end of the day, a perfect example of why all of this vote did this sort of. This is a case, the red mirage, and then. Right. So
at the end of the day, did the Trump campaign do itself a disservice by talking down early voting? I mean,
well, no, because their turnout came out. They're gonna get more people to vote in Pennsylvania this time than they did 4 years ago. No, what I would say is we did a disservice to the American people, because we're sitting here and I think Trump supporters sit there and say, and I've heard from them, I've heard from some acquaintances in Pennsylvania who are Trump supporters who sit there and say, the Democrats are stealing this. And I said, no, this is how it works. The law stated they couldn't start counting the vote by mail until election day itself. So I'm really sorry that the Republican legislature here and the Democratic administration in Pennsylvania could not figure out how to do this the way the state of Florida does it, the way the state of North Carolina does it, the way plenty of other, the state of Texas does it, because this has created this illusion of whatever it is, the blue fade or the red mirage or whatever sort of ridiculous red-blue term you want to use for this. These votes count the same whether they were cast in person or cast in the mail, and unfortunately, the way the vote counting process, the way the state of Pennsylvania was forced to do this, it has created this. So that's the part of this, frankly, if you're asking me, I mean, there's no difference. The president did a great turnout. Joe Biden did a good turnout. I think we're going to find out he could have done better over here in turnout in some of the Democratic strongholds, but he did good enough. But that's what we're seeing here anyway. It's just an explanation of why the vote by mail, it didn't matter if it came from a solid red county. The vote by mail has been Biden heavy.
And at the risk of stating the obvious, let's just remember we're in a pandemic, right? So people voted by mail who were concerned about going in person and being exposed to the coronavirus.
I stood in a line for 3 hours long and really worried about that distance.
Or they voted early. And that group of people tended, unfortunately, masks became politicized. Yeah. The pandemic became politicized. So people who voted early, even in red Pennsylvania, tended to be people that were concerned and mask wearing, and those tended to skew Democrat.
And we saw in the polling, I just discussed with John Ralston, basically it was mostly Democratic voters who picked containing the virus, and it was mostly Republican voters. I mean, in that sense, the president successfully, you could say his message was successful, at least for the people that supported him, did seem to align with him on what balance to strike between the virus and the economy. By the way, what does this mean overall? So here in a red county, right, if you're the Trump campaign and you think, oh, good, and Biden's lead grew, right? Like at the end of the day, his lead is now over 13,000, thanks to Crawford County, a county that Donald Trump won with 68%.
All right, we need to go back to the White House and Hallie Jackson. I understand we're getting some communication from the president.
We are. A new statement from President Trump, Lester, is on passed by the campaign. I'm going to read it to you in full, so forgive me as I look on the phone. I'm not sure if we'd have time to make a graphic yet. This is literally just coming into us, but it's from President Trump, and he says the following, quote, he says, "We believe the American people deserve to have full transparency into all vote counting and election certification, and that this is no longer about any single election. The president continues that this is about the integrity of our entire election process. And I'm quoting here. He says, from the beginning, we have said that all legal ballots must be counted and all illegal ballots should not be counted. Yet we've met resistance for this basic principle by Democrats at every turn. The president wraps up his statement by saying, we will pursue this process through every aspect of the law to guarantee the American people have confidence in our government, saying, I will never give up fighting for you and our nation. And again, that is the statement that is just coming into us from President Trump as we are seeing this race in Pennsylvania. Watching those numbers obviously give Joe Biden a lead. NBC News has not called that race. A couple of things here based on this statement. Number one, that the president indicates that he's going to continue to pursue this process through every aspect of the law. That backs up to me on the record what we have been reporting now for the last several hours, which is that the president will continue to fight and that their legal strategy, their strategy overall now runs through the courts as far as the president's path to push forward. I have to note, too, while the president says that this is about the integrity of our entire election process, it bears repeating. There is no evidence of widespread fraud in this election. There are no reports of widespread fraud. There are no reports of any systemic issues with the election process as it has been conducted. This election has proceeded as expected, with a lot of ballots taking a long time to count, partly because there were so many mail-in ballots because of course, the pandemic that Kate just referenced. This is proceeding as expected. What is notable about this statement, you can't see it, it is, in sentence format, in the punctuation is there, and I say that because the last statement we heard from the president yesterday was, you know this, Chuck, it was about 2 sentences, all caps. It felt very much like it was the president's voice. It was very characteristic of what we've seen from the president on Twitter and elsewhere. I am just telling you, based on 5 years covering this president, this statement is somewhat out of character from the president and the statements that we have seen him make, on air and on Twitter, particularly as it relates to this election process. Yeah. I have to say that there are Republicans, Lester, who are saying, Mitt Romney, for example, is out with a statement basically saying, listen, go to court, right? If you take the legal, do the legal things that you think you need to do if it is sort of confined to the bounds of the law and what is allowable, if you want to continue to fight that. What the concern is, and what Senator Romney and others are saying now, some in the Republican circles, is don't spread widespread, baseless, incorrect, false, inaccurate claims of voter fraud, because that is actually what's undermining the integrity of this election.
Yeah, I'm reading it here. It's carefully worded, and it doesn't make any specific allegations. It just gives you the sense that something is wrong. And if I read this in a vacuum, I'd say this is someone trying to make an appeal for election reform,
or someone preparing to accept something that's inevitable. I mean, look, Hallie, this does not sound like the Donald Trump of just 6 hours ago. How about that?
Because there's no specific.
There's no specific, and he doesn't seem to be alleging anything here. It's careful. Now, look, should be 2 motivations here. If he wants to find more fellow Republicans to have his back, he needs to not say as many outlandish wrong things. A statement like this is something that a Pat Toomey can get. There's nothing in here that Pat Toomey could object to. There's nothing in here that Mitt Romney could object to. There's nothing in here that Mitch McConnell could object to.
There's almost nothing in there that Democrats could object to, because he's saying count all the legally cast votes, which I think every single American would support.
That's right, and it's interesting. It means somebody got him to sign off on this, which one might argue is the beginning. You want to talk about the different steps of acceptance there. That might be where we're in a step of acceptance.
We want to bring into this conversation NBC News political analyst and conservative host, The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem radio network, Hugh Hewitt, and former press secretary to President Obama, NBC News political analyst Robert Gibbs. Hugh, first, join this conversation, if you will. I don't know if you heard the entire statement from the president, but it does not make specific allegations of election fraud like some of what we heard from the president earlier, and reads more as an aspiration for a better election system. What's your read? Is the president now preparing for a graceful way to exit some of his allegations?
I don't know. Allegations are not evidence, and evidence is not a verdict. And I think he realizes, as most of his supporters realize, you've got to actually have a narrative and an allegation backed up by evidence to move forward in the court. I have been going back and consulting, oddly enough, with a couple of Nixon historians about President Nixon's decision in 1960 not to contest the election. He made that decision, they tell me, after he reached the conclusion that to go further with a recall, it had begun, or a recount in Illinois, that it would injure his future more than it would help it. And he thought, I'm going to live to fight another day. If the president is looking forward, as some people have already talked about, to 2024, if he's worried about his family's future political fortunes, that may be figuring into the dialing back of the rhetoric. There's also the reality. He needs there are 4 battlegrounds. He needs 3 wins. Before you get to 3, you got to get to 1. There is a recount underway in Georgia, which will matter quite a lot. He's done a lot for the Republican Party in this election. He got 70 million votes. He's won big gains, or he's led to wins in the House, probably in the Senate, in the state legislatures. He got a governorship. Right now, the party is very happy with him. And so I think there is a balancing act going on. What helps the president and the party that he leads the most? If you can get 1 win somewhere, full back to full mode, like Chuck was saying. I applaud, though, the way you've read it is exactly how I heard it, and how 70 million Trump voters heard it, that's not unreasonable. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, and Robert, does this pave the way? Do you see a conversation between Joe Biden and President Trump before this day is over?
We may very well be heading toward that, Lester. I think as you see Pennsylvania getting farther and farther away from President Trump and closer to a president-elect Joe Biden, I think that's certainly in the offing. And I agree with both what Chuck and Hugh have said here. I think for Chuck saying this is about making sure that the Republican Party is surrounding you and not walking away from your statements. And I agree with Hugh that this may be about preserving your standing for another day. And I think it's an interesting development. I think it will be interesting more so to compare it if we see President Trump today. Do we hear the audibilization of a written statement, which is easier to deliver something like this in a written form, than if we see him on camera? Is he back to what we saw last night and everyone cut away from? Or does he maintain where he is in this statement?
Do you sense that there's this consternation in the White House right now over this very issue of how to communicate, how to express, worry about the election without burning down the House?
I would certainly think so, because I think you're preserving you're preserving 2 things, right? You are preserving for the president his reputation and his future standing. And as you said, there's no reason Republicans wouldn't be very happy with what happened broadly on election night just a few nights ago. But I think also, somebody clearly has talked to him about what the country is in need of and what the office of the office of president is in need of. And those are really important things for the continuation of our democracy in our country.
And Hugh, this is a president who never apologizes and never backs down, and to his supporters, that's the root of his strength. In this circumstances, what will his final message be if he confronts a loss? What would you expect to hear from him? Would it be something that we would normally think of as a concession, or will he find another way?
I think he'll find another way, Lester. Making America great again can be a part of many different messages. If he decides to exit because he can't get 1 win somewhere, which would lead to the 2nd win to the 3rd, I expect him to say what Richard Nixon said in 1960, and they were friends, by the way. They were good friends. They saw each other around New York, and if Nixon were alive, he'd say to him, find a defensible line, retreat to it, and save up your powder, and glory in making the Republican Party a majority in the Senate, which I think is likely to happen. Push on with every recount, demand that recounts be fair and full, but avoid giving in to the 10%. There's a bell curve in everything. There's a bell curve in the people who voted for Donald Trump as well. The 10%, the farthest, a hardcore right wing, want him to go to the state legislatures and have them overrule the popular vote. That's crazy. That's as radical as court packing. And the Republican Party is not a radical party. It's a party of the rule of law. So I think if he wants to play to the middle of his bell curve within the Republican Party, he finds a way to say, we're going to retreat to defensible lines and continue to make America great again through the Senate and through the House. And I'll be seeing you on the campaign trail at my rallies for the next 10 years.
All right. You?
10.
Lester.
Grover Cleveland.
Just a data point for you. I've been watching both the official President Trump Twitter page and Donald J. Trump's Twitter page. Neither of them have provided this statement that we've been showing. So in other words, the president has not tweeted the statement that we're reading that's attributed to him. He has not owned that on his Twitter page.
Maybe his phone's charging.
Maybe he's busy. An hour ago, he was still talking about missing military ballots in Georgia.
And I'll just briefly read it again if you're just joining us and help you understand the conversation. Statement from the president a short while ago. He says, we believe the American people deserve to have full transparency into all vote counting and election certification, and that this is no longer about any single election. This is about the integrity of the entire election process. From the beginning, we've said that all legal ballots must be counted and all illegal ballots should not be counted. Yet we have met resistance to this basic principle by Democrats at every turn. We will pursue this process through every aspect of the law to guarantee that the American people have confidence in our government. I will never give up fighting for you and our nation. President Donald J. Trump. So that, you could read a number of ways, certainly as a potential graceful off-ramp to some of the more inflammatory statements and preparing for what comes next. So we will reset here. Our special Decision 2020 coverage continues. We want to take a quick look at where we stand at this moment. We're closely watching 4 key states that have yet to be called, but where Joe Biden is holding a narrow lead as vote counting continues. Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. Joe Biden currently has 253 electoral votes based on the races that we have called. So a win in Pennsylvania alone with its 20 electoral votes would put him over the required 270 and make him president-elect. Donald Trump, with 214 electoral votes, has a much more difficult path, as you've been hearing. He cannot win without Pennsylvania, even if he manages to win all 3 of those other states. So he's got a very narrow working space right now. I want to go to Kristen Welker. She is at Joe Biden headquarters in Wilmington, Delaware. You've been noting that they are feeling very good, very optimistic, but this is not a done deal yet, Kristen.
This is not a done deal, Lester. You're absolutely right. And I heard you talking about the possibility of a concession call. I can tell you, based on my conversations, Vice President Joe Biden's not going to wait for that before addressing the nation if there is, in fact, an official call in this race. Now, we have been told that he is watching these returns. He's feeling quite confident, and we heard that in his remarks yesterday. When he spoke for about 2 minutes. He reiterated he wants to see every vote counted, but he was quite bullish. He said he believes once that happens, he and Senator Harris will prevail in this race. Now, if and when we do hear from Vice President Biden, we're told that we'll also hear from Senator Harris. What will their tone be? Well, according to one advisor, he is going to talk about healing, unity, and coming together as a nation. Really the themes that have governed his entire campaign. But it's also significant because what we are seeing play out is such a sharply divided nation. The margins, as we've talked about over and over again, have just been so close in each of these key battleground states. And so he knows that if he is, in fact, the person who winds up winning this race, that is going to be his first and arguably one of his toughest challenges, to try to bring this country together. And he talked about that. He said, look, I'm not naive. I know that it's an uphill battle, but it is something that needs to be tackled. In terms of the rhetoric that we're hearing from President Trump, that official statement went out. I think Kate's right. Let's see what he has to say on Twitter. But the Biden campaign, and I'll just remind everyone, has been quite defiant, releasing a statement saying, as we said on July 19th, the American people will decide this election, and the United States government is perfectly capable of escorting trespassers out of the White House. Lester.
All right. Thank you, Kristen Welker, for that. Peter Alexander is at the White House, and we got the statement from the president just a short time ago. Peter, what can you tell us?
Yeah, Lester, that's right. You know, it's notable as you saw that statement from the president today, just how different it was from what we heard from him publicly yesterday in the briefing room, where he was making those false claims without evidence of widespread voter fraud, claims that even members of his own party pushed back on yesterday, calling them inflammatory and dangerous. And then this new statement from the president that really doesn't sound a lot like his voice, very different, saying this is a much bigger issue, an issue of transparency, an issue not about any single election, about our election system at large, saying that he would continue this fight to the very end for you, as he describes, and for the American people at large. You know, one thing I'm struck by as we continue to have these conversations right now is, for the moment, of course, President Trump is the president. 75 more days until the inauguration. Whether or not he wins, that remains to be seen. But in conversations I've had with some White House officials in recent days, as they anticipated this could be a protracted process, they said they were advising the president that they wanted him to be more public, that he should be more public, demonstrating his responsibilities in the role, that he was still working on behalf of the American people. But to be totally clear, there has not been one public item on his schedule since his remarks late election night. So now, for approaching 3 full days, the best of our knowledge, it's been mostly waiting, watching television, and fuming in a series of tweets and other ways. Compare that to Joe Biden right now, who, as we reported just yesterday, had a coronavirus briefing before he made his public statements. Here, to the best of our knowledge, the president hasn't had a formal briefing of that kind in a significant period of time, even as the coronavirus pandemic grows in terms of the number of infections, hospitalizations, and deaths. So it does raise real questions as we talk about what the president will do in terms of the possibility of a concession. And aides tell me that that conversation hasn't taken place. They think it is way premature, as they still continue with the public message of, we're going to be defiant, we're going to fight this to the very end. Is what happens in terms of the governance of the country, what plans the president has, how he will sort of deal with those responsibilities at the very same time. Lester?
All right, good questions. All right, Peter Alexander, thank you. I want to go back to Justice correspondent Pete Williams. We were chatting about lawsuits in Pennsylvania. You've got some new information.
Right. There's been now a ruling from an intermediate appellate court in Pennsylvania on this question about whether voters can come in and cast a provisional ballot to fix a problem with their mail ballots. Now, the state court has just said to the Secretary of State, you must order all local election officials to set aside any provisional ballots that were filed this way, any provisional ballots that were cast by mail-in voters who were given a chance to cast a provisional ballot to fix some problem with their mail-in votes. So from now on, the Secretary of State is ordered to tell the election officials they have to set any provisional ballots aside and not count them yet until the court decides whether there is a legal right to count those ballots. As I said earlier, Lester, this is the issue. The Republicans say there's no provision in state law that allows a voter to fix their ballot that way, to repair any problems in it. The Democrats say, well, the law isn't explicit. It doesn't explicitly say we can, but it doesn't explicitly say we can't. And so we think that this is consistent with letting people vote freely and fairly. So that's the question. Now, it does seem to me, Lester, that this is only going to apply from now on, because undoubtedly many counties in the state have already accepted these provisional ballots and put them into the pool of ballots that were cast, and it would be impossible now to go back and say, oops, we shouldn't have counted that ballot there. Once the ballot is separated from the envelope, you don't know who cast it, you don't know what it is, it goes into the pool. So it seems to me this is going to be forward-looking only change, that from now on they have to set any provisional ballots like that aside until the court decides whether they can be counted. And how many ballots that is, I have no clue. There's nothing in any of the court documents that would indicate what the universe of these ballots is.
All right, Pete, thanks for that update. Appreciate it. Rahema Ellis is watching the ongoing vote count in the all-important city of Philadelphia. We got an update from there about an hour or so ago. What have you learned, Rahema?
One of the things we're learning, Lester, is that they're talking about 40,000 mail ballots is what there remain to be counted here. The big question that I had for the election commissions here was how many of those mail-in ballots came in after the 8 o'clock cutoff time of election day, and how many were done before that. I didn't get an answer to that, so we're going to continue to pursue that because that could be significant in all of this. The courts had said that they have up until 5 o'clock today to receive those mail-in ballots, which they have set aside. Again, the question is, how many are there? Lester?
All right, Rahima Ellis in Philadelphia for us. Thanks very much. We can continue to watch all this play out. Chuck, why don't you give us one more look at the boards?
Well, look, and I'm going to do it in a not dip in anything. Look, we're getting we're obviously getting pockets of mail-in ballots all day long, whatever there is from counties, and as we pointed out to you, even the red counties are coming up in Joe Biden's favor. His lead in Pennsylvania expanded just in the last hour. We are waiting for another pocket of votes out of Clark County. We expect that at 7 p.m. Eastern. It will go a long way in helping us characterize this race, perhaps for the final time in Nevada, with Joe Biden leading. It is over 90% chance that he's carrying Nevada. We're not yet at 99.5. Less clear as to the situation in Arizona, but I can tell you that so far what the president's got out of Maricopa in that first round of votes that we've seen today was not enough to overtake Joe Biden's lead. But there is some question about how many remaining ballots there are. Is there about 150,000 ballots, or is it closer to 226? That would tell you whether the president needs to win, a big majority. But those are the three places we expect to see some votes today.
Which means we're not going home. Chuck, thanks very much. Kate as well. We are going to return you now to regular programming. We will stay right here, standing by, monitoring all those very close uncalled states. We'll come back on the air immediately when there are further developments to bring you. Until then, I'm Lester Holt, NBC News. Stay close, everyone.
Hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. Glad to be with you for Decision 2020 on NBC News Now as the world watches and waits. It has been a very busy day, so let's catch you up on what we're watching right now. We've got the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign weighing their next moves. The Biden campaign is trying to figure out how to manage its excitement over a victory that it believes is imminent. The Trump campaign is trying to figure out how to manage its argument over supposed misdeeds in the election, thus far without having produced any hard evidence. Within the last hour, President Trump released a statement that reads in part, quote, "We will pursue this process through every aspect of the law to guarantee the American people have confidence in our government. I will never give up fighting for you and our nation," unquote. We will continue to check in on the key states where votes are being counted. We'll look in on some of the big Senate races, including the race in Arizona, which we have called for Democrat Mark Kelly. If there are any updates or projections, as we can confirm them, we will bring them to you. But our goal is not to be fast. We're trying to be right, especially at this point in the race. Do stay with our coverage on our YouTube channel, on the NBC News app, or online at NBCNewsNow.com. Let's begin with where we are on the road to 270. Joe Biden, by our count, is 17 electors away. He stands with 253 electoral votes that we can project. President Trump has 214 electoral college votes. Not impossible for either candidate to win, although President Trump's paths to victory are narrower and narrower. We'll illustrate that for you in a little bit. But let's go through some of the key states that we're watching. First of all, the state of Nevada. We still characterize that as too close to call. The registrar of voters in Clark County, that's Las Vegas, says that they're going to release more vote counts at 7 p.m. Eastern time today, and then they will release 2 more vote count sets every day going forward until everything is counted. So we may have a better idea of what's going on in Nevada in about 5 hours, but for now, that race remains too close to call. Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, could be the checkmate state. It's the only one that Joe Biden needs to win to clinch the White House. But as for those 20 electoral votes, that remains too close to call. And close indeed. Just 13,000 votes separate the two main candidates out of well over 6 million, more than 6.5 million that have been cast. A state appeals court has told counties to set aside provisional ballots, over a lawsuit questioning whether they can be counted at all, especially if they have some issues like, say, a signature that needs to be corrected. So lots of variables to work through in Pennsylvania. We'll update you on that in a little bit, but Pennsylvania remains too close to call. Georgia is also too close to call. It's even closer. Some of us went to high schools that have more people than the difference between these candidates. Not my words. Those are the words of the elections official who told us about this today and said that almost certainly Georgia will have a recount because it's just too close. So at this point, we're leaving Georgia as too close to call. Arizona is another one of the states that we're watching, also too close to call. This one is key because most of the votes we're looking for are coming from just one county in Arizona, Maricopa County. That's where Phoenix is. Once those votes are totaled up, we may have a clear idea of whether Joe Biden can claim that state. But for now, Arizona remains too close to call. And that is why the map looks the way that it is. So big states to watch for now are Nevada, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. The paths to victory could run through any of the states that are still grayed out right now, but those are the three big ones, with Joe Biden ahead just 17 electors away from the White House by our projections. And take a look at the popular vote. Donald Trump with almost 70 million votes, Joe Biden with almost 74 million. Regardless of who wins at this point, at least, Joe Biden has acquired more individual votes than any presidential candidate in American history. That's where we stand right now overall in the race. Let's get a little bit more perspective on all the states we're watching so closely. From NBC Senior Political Director Mark Murray, and also Kenneth Vogel, who covers the intersection of politics and money for the New York Times. Ken, let me start with you right now. I'm curious about what strikes you the most about what we've been learning in the last few hours.
Well, I've been talking to election lawyers, Republican election lawyers who have worked with the party, not necessarily with the Trump campaign, but are closely following a number of the lawsuits that the Trump folks are really clinging to as offering the potential to string out the process and to continue fighting, as they put it. Most of these folks are sort of realists, and they say that even if the Trump campaign and in the lawsuits in which it has intervened or brought is successful, it's probably not going to influence the margins in any of these key states. In fact, one of the big lawsuits, one of the lawsuits that has the most traction, is already before the U.S. Supreme Court, and it would actually allow the counting of ballots in Pennsylvania that were received, mail-in ballots that were received between 8 p.m. on Election Day and the end of the day today. That is actually likely to pad Joe Biden's tally more because, as we've seen, the mail ballots are breaking towards Joe Biden, and there's no reason to believe that the late arriving mail ballots would do otherwise. So they are increasingly pessimistic and increasingly hoping that there is someone who can deliver this message to the president himself in a way that he would grasp it, understand it, that these lawsuits are not the lifeline that he appears to think that they are.
Yeah, that lawsuit, the Supreme Court lawsuit, Republican Party of Pennsylvania versus Bookvar. Kathy Bookvar is the Secretary of State in Pennsylvania. Secretaries of State in states oversee a number of functions, including elections. Mark, what about you? What stands out about where we are right now?
It's just the sheer math, Joshua. And, Ken was telling you about a lot of the legal wranglings. And to me, when particularly we end up looking at Pennsylvania, this was a situation where 48 hours ago, before the mail-in ballots started to come in, before we got a good gauge of what was going on in Philadelphia, President Trump had a lead. And since this morning, and then throughout the rest of the morning and early afternoon, we have seen Joe Biden's lead continue to grow as mail-in ballots across the state come in from Pennsylvania. And Joshua, to me, you've been talking about the Keystone checkmate. Well, what we're looking for is particularly outstanding ballots in Allegheny County. That's Pittsburgh. We believe there's some 35,000 votes there. And if they come in at the rate we've seen, the share we've seen for Joe Biden versus President Trump so far, that could end up having a decisive type of figuring on the math. Now, we need to see those votes coming in. I do think that's why we've been cautious, why there has been no call from no one. But I do think that Allegheny County, and when that decides to come in, could be very consequential.
Mark, what do you make of the legal strategy from the White House right now, particularly the statement that we heard from the president basically saying that he will fight on through all legal means, basically fight on as long as it takes? At least that's the implication from what the statement said.
Yeah, I agree completely with Ken. This is all about trying to play your hand as long as possible to try to string things out. In a lot of ways, this is not all that dissimilar from the president's legal strategy when it came to impeachment and the Mueller investigation. It is very consistent with a lot of his business practices as well, too. This has been his tried and true, I think, stance when it comes to using the levers of the legal system to try to just buy yourself some time. I do think, however, that what the very difference is, at some point, we're going to run out of vote to count. And there is also going to run out of models to actually give you a path to victory. And so while there might be all those legal maneuvers to buy you time, the votes left and the math left might end up being more decisive.
Ken, while we're waiting to hear about the presidency, I'm also interested in your read on where things stand in Congress with the House and the Senate. Those Georgia Senate races have become increasingly important and gotten a whole lot of attention. We've called the Arizona race, and there's been a little bit of a shift in the House, although it looks like Democrats will still maintain control, just not by the same margin.
Yeah, it's really all about Georgia, Joshua, as you noted. Those two races in the Senate races going to runoffs. It's possible. It seems unlikely that Democrats would be able to prevail in one or both. They would need to prevail in both in order to have a 50-50 split in the Senate, which is what they need to do to have control over the Senate, because Kamala Harris, presumably the vice president-elect potentially here shortly, would be the tie-breaking vote. Without those two victories and without control of the Senate, it's just going to be real tough to see a Biden agenda that embraces some of the elements that progressives were hoping that they would see from Biden having any kind of traction. Even going to be difficult for the Biden administration, potential Biden administration, to get progressive nominees confirmed by the Senate, let alone judicial nominees. I'm talking about nominees to run the government in the cabinet. So we're setting up potentially, if Georgia goes as forecasters predict, for some real gridlock here.
Mark, Kenneth, please do stick around. That's NBC senior political editor Mark Murray and Kenneth Vogel of the New York Times. Much more to discuss as the hour goes on. Margins are starting to widen in uncalled states for former Vice President Joe Biden as we await the final results. His path to 270 and the White House are looking more clear by the hour. But again, we're still looking for a few more votes. This race is far from over. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi addressed the state of the race this morning.
I wish we weren't wearing masks so we could see how exciting it is to come before you today with Joe Biden having the tremendous mandate that he has, and that pretty soon the hyphen will be gone from Vice President to President-elect Joe Biden. It's a happy day for our country, because Joe Biden is a unifier, because he is determined to bring people together, because he respects all points of view. And as he has said, I ran as a Democrat, I'll govern as president for all of the people, whether they voted for me or not.
Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Let's go down to NBC's Ali Vitale covering the Biden campaign. She joins us now from the Biden campaign headquarters at the Chase Center in Wilmington, Delaware. Ali, what's the latest from the campaign? Any reaction, any more reaction to the state of the race, or any reaction to that statement we just got from the president?
Still a pretty jubilant vibe here. They feel they're very much on the path to 270 and that they're going to get there. So much so that even one of the more reserved members of the Biden team who I was talking to said at this point, they just view it as an eventuality. That being said, we have learned that we're going to see the Democratic ticket in prime time tonight. First, Kamala Harris will speak. Then we will hear from former Vice President Joe Biden. And it's important to note that he's not necessarily going to come out and declare victory, especially if the networks have not yet hit 270. Instead, he's going to make remarks that he believes that he's going to be the next president of the United States, and is not going to say anything that would insinuate that he believes the votes should stop being counted. They think that the vote counting should still go on. They also think that that still helps them, because if they for some reason haven't hit those margins, though they do seem to be expecting that they're going to get to 270 before this evening, if they haven't hit it yet, they still think that the vote counting is going to put them where they need to be. They look at the margins that we've seen tightening in places like Nevada and Georgia, certainly in Pennsylvania. These are the things that they thought would happen, and so they feel they're very much on their predicted path forward. It's also interesting that Kamala Harris will have time to speak tonight. It's a little bit unusual because vice presidential contenders don't typically speak on nights like this. But that being said, she is historic in the fact that she would be the first female vice president that we've ever had, the first woman of color vice president that we've ever had. And so certainly history in the making here if this ticket gets to 270. I'll say that it comes after a Democratic primary, which I covered the entirety of, where we saw more women and candidates of color running than ever before. I remember being outside Elizabeth Warren's house on the day that she dropped out, seeing moms with their daughters dropping off flowers and cards outside Warren's house and feeling really dejected, because after seeing 2018 and the Year of the Woman and the way that women helped Democrats take back the House, there was a lot of energy around the potential for another woman in this nominee slot and then potentially putting her into the White House. There was a lot of sadness when we saw that period of the primary end, but now a lot of those women are able to see that representation matters. We've seen girls dressing up as Kamala Harris in their blazers and chucks for Halloween. Clearly, this is having a cultural impact as well as the political one that we're expecting, if not tonight, then hopefully soon.
And Ali, what's your sense of the action going on at the campaign with regards to a possible transition? Clearly, they feel like it's just a matter of time before they can actually count this as a win, but they're trying not to act like it too much, even though they clearly feel that way. Are they taking any steps to kind of prep a transition?
They are, and they have been, mostly because legally they've had to set up that transition operation several months ago. But this is one of the interesting things here, because we heard them talk about the transition right when it came to fruition, because it legally had to. But then yesterday on a campaign call, we asked campaign manager Jen O'Malley Dillon about it, and she really dodged. She said, "I'm the campaign manager. I'm focused on the campaign." It's only interesting because they did put live a website for the transition. There's a landing page there. There's not much more to it other than the fact that it sort of plants the flag that it exists. But it's interesting that they are both talking about this as something that's an eventuality, but not fully wanting to get out there by saying, all right, we're in the swing of a transition at this point.
Thank you, Ali. That's NBC's Ali Vitale joining us now from the Biden camp in Wilmington, Delaware. We mentioned that the vote count continues in Nevada. Let's check in on that with NBC's Jolene Kent, who joins us now from North Las Vegas in Clark County. Clark County includes the Las Vegas area. Jolene, the registrar of voters in Clark County, Joe Gloria, gave a press conference just a few minutes ago. What kinds of updates did he have, particularly in terms of how the count's going?
So it's interesting because it sounds like a mistake was made within Clark County in terms of how many ballots they were planning to release today. I originally had talked to you yesterday about 51,000 ballots coming down the pike, right? But today they only released some 30,000 results. And the reason is they said that they miscounted the way that the ballots are organized, the ballot pages versus the actual ballots themselves. And so that's why they released fewer votes today. But Biden widening his lead to about 20,000 votes across Nevada. Of course, here in Clark County, there's a lot of pressure on that registrar to speed up the process, and they say they are doing it at their own pace. And that for them, again, he reiterated that accuracy is the priority. It is not about getting this done super quickly. He did say, though, he got more specific about the mail ballots, saying, look, we're probably going to have most of those counted here in Clark County by Sunday. So that was new information as well. But In terms of all the legal stuff happening on the side, you have the Trump campaign filing a letter alleging fraud in the system to the DOJ, to Attorney General Barr. And the registrar's response to that was, look, we have a lot of people who do vote from out of state because it's a large military community. People do absentee ballots. He does not see any fraud in the system. So they are sticking to their story on that front, Joshua.
As of earlier today, Pete Williams, our justice correspondent, had reported that lawsuit the Trump campaign had threatened to file, that they haven't filed it yet. There's supposed to be a hearing later on today with some Republican politicians in Nevada who have other lawsuits. Do we know whether or not the Trump campaign is actually going to go forward with that?
So there was a lawsuit filed late last night that the Trump campaign is linked to, and that was the same press conference that we reported on yesterday regarding the one voter, Jill Stokey, along with a couple of other people and some congressional campaigns alleging voter fraud, improper counting, improper ballots. That lawsuit has been filed in federal court here in Nevada. Now, the Jill Stokey case in particular, just to remind you, is about an individual who says she wanted to go vote in person, she couldn't, but then because someone had already submitted a mail ballot with her signature on it. When we asked the registrar about that particular case, about Stokey's situation, he said that he personally resolved it with her here at Clark County prior to, just after that she reported that incident. And so that she declined to make a statement about the matter, and the issue was resolved in the eyes of Clark County. So we'll see how this proceeds, but certainly if you go through that lawsuit in particular, it's an interesting read, and it's certainly not perhaps your traditional lawsuit in the sense that there's pages and pages of stuff. It's relatively short. So it's an interesting case here that people are looking at, but that was, Jill Stokey did present herself at that Trump campaign presser yesterday, but it's been a very interesting situation in the sense that there's concerns about voter fraud, but the Clark County registrar saying we don't have that evidence. We haven't been presented with any further evidence from the Trump campaign, Joshua.
And before I let you go, what's the mood like there right now? It's been kind of varying from being busy to quiet to tense to a little calmer. It looks like there are people behind you in line who are doing some work on curing their ballots if there are issues with signatures and such.
Yes. Exactly. So some of the people behind me are here to cure their ballots, take a look at that signature issue. And of course, here in Clark County, they have until November 12th to do that. But what's interesting, something that really jumps out to me, having covered presidential elections before and having gone to other registrars, is that the access into watching the vote count here in Clark County, Joshua, is not exactly very transparent. We go in for these press conferences. We're allowed to observe like the other observers are, but after a certain period of time, the journalists are moved out. And so we don't have a full picture of exactly how the count is going with our own eyes. We're going off of what the county registrar is telling us beyond what we see for, say, maybe about an hour, hour and a half at a time. And so it's an interesting dynamic because there's so few votes coming out right now, it raises more questions about the speed, about the effectiveness, about how they're going about this. So we continue to press for answers on that front. I've requested more time with the county registrar to go through some more of the details and be able to see more of what's going on for the public to see here in Nevada, Joshua.
Thank you, Joe. Much appreciated. That's NBC's Jolene Kent joining us from North Las Vegas. Let's head now to Georgia, where those races are still just about as tight as they can possibly get. NBC's Priscilla Thompson joins us now from Atlanta. Priscilla, what's the latest there, particularly with talk of a recount?
Well, Joshua, that's exactly what I was going to say. The Secretary of State is again today signaling that we are in recount territory. These margins are very thin. We're talking about...
You know what? Nobody loves you, nobody loves you. Почему так? Что? Порнографический сайт? Нет. Ну да. Но это и есть оно самое. Это они как бы сами вроде как добавляются. А что, являйся. Ну ладно, понятно. Да нет, просто почему нет? Ну как бы да, думаешь, что это да, забудь просто. Эй. Это выглядит некрасиво как-то, да. Ну нет. Ну надо как-то. It's okay, it's fine. Как эту штуку называют? Не надо. Эй! Сузик. это я говорю. Ну нет. Ну нет. Ну это да. Спикер государственной штучки. Сейчас, Parliamo, parlare, parlando. Puedo dire. Что, смеешься, что ли? Внутри что делается, да? Ну нет, ну надо, так сделано специально, чтобы не надо. Сволочь, блин. Меняется жизнь. Не думаю об этом даже. Не думаю. Ну нет, ну надо, кучу времени тратить. Очень хорошо. Мстислава. Михаил. Нет, ну вот это есть оно, да, к нам. Ну на вот это имеется в виду, что тебя никто не видит просто там. Ну типа да, никто даже не смотрит, что там пишешь, да, вот про тебя и говорит. Ну и что ты хочешь там сказать? Ну себя так думать. Ну нет, ну нам это есть оно. А, типа маскировка, что ли, или что это значит? Ну нет, ну ладно. Что надо вообще? Да пошел ты нахер, блин, мразь, блин, чертова, мразь. Что есть? Спасибо, не так думаю, да, наоборот. Есть, что я, да. 6 раз умнее был. Нет, я не понимаю. Ну вот расскажи мне, да. Ну нет, она всегда вот так же близко на самом деле. Все, оказывается, выживают. То есть ты не жизнь живешь, ты выживаешь, что ли. Это интересно. Ни разу не я, ни разу не я. Ну что? Нет, ну ладно. Ну нет, наоборот, нет, ну да, блокировать будет типа, ну да, понимаешь. Вчера меня смотрели. Я посмотрел, сколько можно стоит. Куда ходить, если это он досвятый. Не точит, не точит. Не, трогайте меня вообще. Не знаю, это и как. Ну нет. Не надо. Это понятно. Ну, все это фигня мучит меня, прямо сказать. Не надо говорить. Понятно. Ну нет, не да. Ну, вроде нет. Регионе ставят, регионе. Даже ее знаю.
Sense that the Republican Party has been throwing a lot of spaghetti up on the wall to see what sticks. But there's also the sense that a lot of these lawsuits were not well thought out. And questions of standing, questions of whether there's really a claim stated. Perhaps the one that I think concerns me the most has already been to the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court once, and by a 4-4 vote, they didn't take it or they didn't act on it. That could go back again. There may be something there that commands their attention now that there's a full court.
Before I come to you, Professor, the Republican Party of Pennsylvania has asked the U.S. Supreme Court to stop the counting of mail ballots that were received after Tuesday afternoon. This was that issue involving whether Pennsylvania could count ballots that were postmarked by Election Day but received by today at 5 p.m. And now the Republican Party has asked the court to order the Secretary of State, Kathy Boockvar in Pennsylvania, to log and set aside those ballots, but not to count them. Ted, what do you make of that?
Well, that's an important development. The Pennsylvania Secretary of State has been very outspoken, as the governor has been. They're almost throwing a challenge to the Republican Party, and now the Republican Party has gone to an ever more, conservative Supreme Court, and that's something to take pretty seriously. Of course, we don't know whether all 9 justices on the Supreme Court now will participate in the case yet.
I should also note, by the way, just for clarity, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court allowed for this extension of the deadline. This appeal today is made to the United States Supreme Court, just to clarify where that sits. Professor Lichtman, I want to ask you about the tone of the president. He continues making these claims of voter fraud that have no basis in fact thus far. Here's part of what the president said in the White House briefing room last night.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal the election from us. If you count the votes that came in late, we're looking at them very strongly, but a lot of votes came in late.
A number of problems with that statement. First of all, if you count the legal votes, I easily win. Not by our math, he doesn't. By our math thus far, if the trend continues, there are more paths to victory for Joe Biden than for Donald Trump, as we just illustrated. But all the votes have yet to be counted. If you count the illegal votes, this rhetoric about stealing the election, that persists. But then today, Professor, he released a statement saying in part, quote, "We will pursue this process through every aspect of the law to guarantee the American people have confidence in our government. I will never give up fighting for you and our nation," unquote. That's quite a tonal shift, Professor. What do you make of that?
It is a tonal shift, but it's not a substantive shift. You've got to get inside the head of an extreme narcissist. What Donald Trump really thinks is votes cast against him must necessarily be illegal or rigged, because he is so terrific, he can't imagine anyone voting against him. And of course, we all know this is completely false. There was a leading Republican who was in charge of training poll watchers who made this very right statement. He said, if Democrats are inveterate cheaters, why did they forget to cheat in 2016, when the margin for Donald Trump was so razor thin in critical states that a little bit of cheating could have turned the election to the Democrats? The answer is, of course, they don't cheat. Voter fraud is vanishingly small, and it is not present in this election. Look, you see these people on television counting these perfectly legal ballots. But I want to make a really important point, because I think it's been missed by the media. It is not normal practice to file a plethora of lawsuits, throwing mud at the wall, hoping something will stick. No presidential candidate, much less a sitting president, has ever done this before. This is reprehensible. This is, in fact, an attempt to steal the election. What Donald Trump is hoping that somehow he'll get a case to the Supreme Court. He put on 3 justices. They'll reward him with a couple of others by handing him the election. That is not going to happen. But this profligate filing of lawsuits is unprecedented. Even Richard Nixon, when he lost by a hair in 1960 and had much more legitimate reasons, quite frankly, to suspect voter fraud back then in Cook County, Illinois. He said, I'm not going to do this because I don't want to cast doubt on the integrity of our process. Donald Trump cares nothing about our democracy. He only cares about himself.
And Professor Lichtman, very, very briefly, before I have to let both of you go, the kind of division we're seeing in the country right now post-election, I presume that's not unusual either. Briefly.
No, it's not. I mean, we had a civil war. But I have to say this, Joe Biden is not Barack Obama. He's not inspirational, but he may be what we need right now, a non-threatening, reconciling, empathetic figure who has a history of working across the aisles.
Well, we will. I take your point in terms of him not being inspirational. I think that's kind of his ideal persona, is just somebody who can calm things down. We'll see how the vote count comes out. Alan, Ted, we appreciate it. That's presidential historian Alan Lichtman and NBC legal analyst and law professor Ted Shaw. Well, as the nation continues to count ballots, President Trump is claiming that votes are being stolen. There's no proof of that. But Why does it take this much time to tally votes? NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce explains.
Where are the votes? Where are the votes? You can't stop the revolution! You can't stop the revolution!
I know what you're thinking. Why is it taking so long to find out who our next president is? Full results are never available on election night. We're just used to learning the president-elect fairly early because of news outlet projections. So the system is still working. It's just slow. And the pandemic isn't helping. Over 60 million Americans casted mail-in or absentee ballots. That's up more than 80% compared to 2016. But here's the thing. It can also take longer to process these mail-in ballots. Election workers need to open envelopes, flatten ballots, and verify signatures before they're scanned and counted. And on top of that, some states are slower than others. There are 3 important battlegrounds with restrictions on when the mail vote can be processed: Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. In those states, Republican-controlled legislatures resisted pleas from election officials to update the laws to allow for a speedier count. In Pennsylvania, GOP sources within the state house tell me they initially supported an earlier start to processing, but were unable to reach a compromise with the Democratic governor over other concessions. Meanwhile, Florida and Ohio were allowed to process mail-in ballots before November 3rd. That's why they had a lot of the vote counted by the time the polls closed. But in places like Nevada or Arizona, which were allowed to start tabulating before Election Day, it's still taken some time.
I think it's important for the entire country to understand that mail ballots on this scale is very new to the state of Nevada. We made a decision here to provide as much access as we possibly could as a result of the pandemic. And so our process is run a little bit slower.
So why does the president claim his political opponents are trying to steal the election? In Pennsylvania, Republicans are not happy with the state's Supreme Court ruling that allowed mail-in ballots to be counted up to 3 days after Election Day, even if those ballots are not clearly postmarked, as long as there's nothing to suggest they were mailed after the polls closed. Members of the GOP also feel they weren't given enough access to observe the vote counting process. Protesters in several states are echoing those calls for more transparency, even though our reporters on the ground have seen both Democrat and Republican representatives watching the vote count. But a Pennsylvania appeals court did grant the Trump campaign a closer look at the tabulation process. To be clear, none of this is stealing an election. These are deadlines for vote counting that have actually made their way through our court system. There are no surprise ballot drops nefariously shaking things up. In some states, Joe Biden appeared to be ahead at first, only for the president to take the lead after more results came in. In other instances, the president's lead in Michigan and Pennsylvania, for example, narrowed after election night as more mail-in ballots were counted. Now, this could be because more Democrats voted by mail than Republicans. It's a well-researched phenomenon called the blue shift, and election experts have been warning about this for weeks. But that still doesn't point to any evidence of widespread voter fraud. And to be super clear about this, the ballots that are still being counted were not cast after Election Day. Many states will accept mail-in ballots if they were postmarked on or before November 3rd. They're just given some time to be delivered.
The strength of the integrity of this vote is really unparalleled.
Keep in mind, this is a bipartisan process. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, they're all working alongside one another to get these votes counted. Leaders from both parties in the battleground of Arizona released a statement together urging voters to be patient, saying, quote, "An accurate vote takes time." At the end of the day, legal votes are still legitimate, even if they're counted late.
Everyone, I'm Lindsay Reiser. You're watching NBC News Now. We're so happy that you're with us. At this hour, the counting continues. We have been closely monitoring updates from Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia, where officials are planning a recount already. Former Vice President Biden has expanded his lead in Nevada. He takes a lead in Pennsylvania and Georgia. Let's take a look right now where that map stands. We're expecting him to address the nation tonight, according to his campaign. So you see right here, the electoral count hasn't changed in the last day. Former Vice President Joe Biden still has 253 electoral votes. President Trump has 214. But what has changed are the margins. So this morning, Biden, in fact, started to lead right here in Pennsylvania. You see it is still too close to call. That is a difference of 13,600 votes with Biden leading. We also have new numbers in from Nevada, but again, this race still too close to call, although Biden's advantage has been widening. There's a difference there of 20,000 votes. Let's go to Georgia. I mentioned there's already a plan for a recount there. Look at the number right now, the difference between the two candidates here. Again, this too close to call, but only 1,602 votes separate Biden and Trump, with Biden leading there. Again, here is that road to 270. Everybody really is watching Pennsylvania because that would be a clear win for Biden there, put him over the edge if he were to also win Arizona and Nevada. That would be another path for him to get to the White House. But to help make sense of where we are at this hour, a little bit better than me at least, I want to bring in a couple of experts who we are joined by today. We're joined by NBC News political director Mark Murray and Kenneth Vogel, who covers politics and money for the New York Times. So welcome to both of you. And Mark, we're going to start with you. I don't think I'm going to ask you anything you haven't been asked already today. What are you looking for in these next couple of hours?
I'm really looking for Pennsylvania. And again, we have the expectation that there's some 35,000 mail-in ballots from Allegheny County, and that's the Pittsburgh area. And what we've been seeing is that Joe Biden has continued to increase his lead throughout the day in Pennsylvania. And there is the potential that what ends up coming from Allegheny could do that even more so. And of course, it's just not Allegheny County. It's all these counties from Pennsylvania, ones that President Trump won, some that Joe Biden have won, but they all seem to be breaking in Joe Biden's direction. I do think there's a question of how many there are still in Pennsylvania at this direction, what the provisional ballots look like. But I do think that as the day has gone on, we've gotten more and more clarity from Pennsylvania.
And we also, since speaking yesterday, we had another call for the Senate, specifically in Arizona. What can you tell us about that?
So that was for Mark Kelly, the Democrats. This was a seat that Democrats have been favored throughout the entire election cycle. I think it goes to show you how tight Arizona was, not only in the Senate contest, but in the presidential, that it took a while to be able to call it for Mark Kelly. This gives now Democrats a net one pickup. They ended up winning two competitive races in Colorado and Arizona. They lost one in Alabama. That gives them an overall pickup of net one. That is far short of the +3 they needed to be to take control of the Senate if they end up winning the White House. They still have an opportunity to pick up 2 seats, it seems, in the Georgia runoffs that will take place in January. But it overall has been a pretty disappointing night for Democrats who thought that they were going to be able to take control of the United States Senate. And now they're going to have to actually win 2 in runoffs in Georgia, which isn't going to be an easy feat.
Yeah, Ken, can you pick up on that a little bit and tell us what we're expecting in Georgia?
Yeah, so we have 2 runoffs pitting Republican incumbents, one appointed, one elected, against Democratic challengers. Obviously, Georgia has not been in recent elections fertile ground for Democrats, but we see Joe Biden ahead there. And so there is some reason to believe that there could be momentum. Nonetheless, I think it's a really uphill climb for Democrats to win not just one, but both of those seats, which, as Mark mentioned, would be what would be required for them to get a tie in the Senate, a 50-50 tie, in which Democrats would have the advantage, because if Biden prevails here, Kamala Harris, the vice president, would be the tie-breaking vote there. Without that, without those 2 pickups, it's going to be tough sledding for a Biden administration putting forth any kind of ambitious agenda that embraces some of the liberal planks in the platform that the left really rallied to Joe Biden because of the promise that they might be able to influence him, despite the fact that he is sort of considered more of a moderate. The idea that the left would be able to sort of bring him along to some of their positions, I think, is very much in doubt without the Senate. Sure, he could embrace some of these positions rhetorically, but slim likelihood of accomplishing much without Democratic control of the Senate.
So that's the Senate. Mark, what updates do we have right now in the House? We know the Democrats were hoping to pick up a lot of seats, and that wasn't the reality this time around.
So what we do know is that Democrats are going to keep control of the House. And of course, that was the bare minimum goal for them. But they were going into election night favored to pick up seats. And that wasn't necessarily the case 3 or 4 months ago. But I think a lot of forecasters looking at the fundamentals, looking at a lot of the polling, both public and internal, thought that Democrats were going to be able to pick up seats. And what we ended up finding was that in a lot of the congressional districts, the Democrats won in 2018, including on Republican turf. But that was a lot less friendly when President Trump's name was on the ballot. And so we saw Democrats who had a little bit of easier time in 2018 struggle, if not lose some seats, because President Trump was able to bring his people out to on election night because of his situation and place on the ballot. So Republicans, this was a big turnout election that we ended up seeing. And I think a lot of Democrats thought, turnout is going to benefit us, which it did. But big turnout also benefited Republicans, and Republicans got their people out to turn out in places like Texas, including Texas suburbs, and really across the country. And so we saw Republicans overperform in rural and red America, which did not help Democrats in their effort to really be able to pick up congressional seats.
All right, Mark Murray with, I believe, a little guest behind you. We saw your furry friend plop down there on the couch.
He's been my buddy during quarantine throughout this cycle. He provides me comfort, not on a lot of sleep, and he's been man's best friend this entire election cycle.
Dad, when can we play? Can you wrap this up?
Soon, once we have some finality in this election season.
All right, Mark Murray, Ken Vogel, thank you both so much for your time. Appreciate you. We turn now to the latest from Pennsylvania. That's the state that Mark just said he's watching closely. Ballots remain, they're continuing to trickle in, rather, as they... Pennsylvania. MSNBC's Maura Barrett joins us now from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So, Maura, the Biden campaign feeling pretty confident about their odds there this afternoon. Is that enthusiasm warranted?
Well, early this morning, it definitely was, Lindsay. We were all waiting on these mail-in ballots. The mail-in ballots, like Mark was just saying, have been breaking for Biden. There's about 100,000 of these ballots left still to be counted here in Allegheny County. I'm in the warehouse where they are processing and counting their remaining 35,000 ballots. In Philly, we're waiting for about 20,000. And these are these Democratic strongholds that the Joe Biden campaign has been really focusing on to help them get this additional lead over President Trump as these mail-in ballots trickle in. But I do want to point out that we are getting more information about what provisional ballots could look like. Now, there are about 85,000 provisional ballots that we know of. This is not a full count per the Department of State. We will be getting likely more. But basically, provisional ballots are ones that people could vote with, say, if they requested a mail-in ballot and then wanted to vote in person and didn't bring the full envelope.
Maura, I'm so sorry to interrupt you because Pennsylvania is so important and we are watching and we will come back to you. But right now, the Georgia Secretary of State is briefing the media. So let's listen in and we'll come back.
Okay.
We do know that today is the day for the QIWI-Wallet deadline for those military and overseas ballots that would have been postmarked by Tuesday, Election Day, to be accepted and counted in the state. We do have some updated numbers on that. Let's see. On the overall side, we have 18,008 of those ballots have been accepted, and it leaves 8,410 that are still available to be received. Now, again, I want to reemphasize this. That does not mean there's a bucket of 8,410 votes ready to be counted. That means that there are 8,410 votes that could have been postmarked on Tuesday and could be received by the elections official today. So, as I said earlier, it's going to be more than 0 and less than 8,410. So it'll be somewhere in that range. We don't really know how many that is. I do have a county-by-county breakdown of available ones. I'm going to give you some of the highlights, and we're going to try to put this into a release to give the details following this press conference. So, y'all usually want the big ones, so we'll go with that. Bibb, where Macon is, 86 are still out there. Chatham, where Savannah is, 395. Cherokee, do you choose Woodstock? Yeah, Woodstock, why not? 171. Clayton County, 241. Cobb County, 569. Columbia County, 247. Coweta County, 99. DeKalb County, 802. And I want to take a note of personal privilege for a second for the Yankees in the room. It's DeKalb, not DeKalb, not DeKalb, it's DeKalb. So we got to pronounce these things. Doherty, another one of those, where Albany is, they're 74. Douglas County, 111. Fayette, 149. Forsyth, 153. Fulton, 956. And that's the single biggest number, I believe, right there. Gwinnett, 741. Henry, 238. This is another fun one. It's not Houston in Georgia, it's Houston. Houston County, 196. Liberty County, 173. There's a military base there, so there's a little outweighted to its actual size and population. Lowndes County, where Valdosta is, 141. Muskogee County, where Columbus is, 323. Paulding County, 105. Richmond, where Augusta is, 244. Home of the Masters coming up soon. Rockdale, 88 is 80. And I think that's all the biggest ones. So you can take those, add them together, and the balance would be probably about 4,000 for the rest of the 159 counties that I didn't name. So after that, we have the provisionals. And I do have the provisional, an initial provisional report from Fulton County, which is obviously the largest one, which had the biggest potential impact. Their total provisional ballots received was 4,869. They accepted 3,603. So that means they rejected 1,266 of the provisional ballots they had on hand. The biggest chunks of those were the eligibility was verified, means the voter brought their ID in, and that was 1,205 of those. And they voted out of precinct, which means they were inside the correct county. They were Fulton County voters, but they were at the wrong precinct. That's 2,398. Now, the unfortunate part for some of those voters and some of those candidates means if they voted out of precinct, essentially they can only vote on the things that were on the ballot that affected the areas that they shared with the other precincts. So things like president, senator, those votes will count, but state house, county commission, those races would not. That's the difference when you have the vote out of county like that. We don't like seeing voting out of county. We try to encourage people to be told to go to their correct polling location. Now, the rejected ballot justifications we saw on this is out of county, 673. You can only vote provisionally inside your own county. Not registered, so these people were not registered voters, 573, and non-citizens attempting to vote was 13. So that's the initial provisional report from Fulton. I expect that to change somewhat. I was talking to our Fulton County monitor earlier. He said there were some other changes moving on that, as well as some of the absentees that were damaged, they were duping. I don't have a final number on that, but it's somewhere south of 300 that they were cut when they were using the openers and things like that, that they had to redupe, and they're going to be scanning those, and those will be added to tallies today. Let's see, not that one. You know, you start to get crazy looking at all these spreadsheets.
Those included in the already counted numbers?
They are not. They are not. As I understand it, they have not scanned and uploaded those yet.
So
Justin, you're getting ahead. Let me get through all this, and you can come back later. All right. So the total number of provisionals in the state. This is not the total number. This is, we have the numbers from 134 of the 159 counties, and we have a lot of the large ones, but I don't think we have all of the large ones. Like we have DeKalb. Okay, Clayton. I think we might have all the big ones in here now. Again, this is a moving target dealing with elections workers who are doing lots of things at one time. We're very happy when we're working together to get this information to the viewers and the voters out there. And guess what? Gabe didn't hit the sum on all these things yet. So we're going to have to take a second while he does that on live television, because that's the exciting television y'all came for today. All right. 13,012 is the total number of provisionals we're seeing right now. That includes the Fulton County numbers, so you can back those out from the ones I just gave you. So it's really closer to 9,000. And they have these fun things called codes. And these are the different states a provisional can be in. It can be for curing your voter ID. There's two different versions of that. There's a general voter ID, like you forgot it was a first-time voter ID. We didn't have a good voter ID on file. Then there's the provisional not registered, which they couldn't prove your registration at the time, but you can come back and cure that. Extended hours. As y'all may know, we had a handful of precincts around the state that were extended past the 7 o'clock hour under law. All those votes are provisional until just in case a court adjudicates that they shouldn't have been open, but they will all get counted. Then you have out of precinct, which I was describing before, where you can be in the right county, but you're in the wrong precinct. Not a citizen, pretty self-explanatory. And then we have what we call incomplete registrations, where they have a partial registration in the system, but they don't have enough information to identify the voter. They have the opportunity to come back and cure those. We will again try to work on getting a breakdown of those out to y'all. But the biggest one is going to be the, let's see, the out of precinct voters, and that's going to be column G. So let's see how many of those there are. These are ones that will be counted and ended up being included into the count, 3,908. And you don't have to take the subset of the Fulton out because we didn't include that. So the 3,908 is of the counties we have, not including the Fulton ones, which I gave you those numbers earlier. We're seeing uploads every 20, 30 minutes as the counties go through the final stages of trying to get everything done today with the UICAVA, the absentee cures, and the provisionals being verified. So you're going to see lots of uploads. And what we've noticed is it goes up 3 in the margin, goes up 3, goes down 2, goes up 7. I mean, so nothing is moving the needle a lot on these things. So we're still hanging around that 1,500 number right now. But the larger chunk of provisionals could potentially move it some. The UICAVA could potentially move it some. The duplications of damaged ballots could move it some. And again, it depends on where they're coming from. And we're still trying to get everything closed out today. It could slide to tomorrow. And again, when you have my entire high school, I think, was about 2,000 people, and we have less than that involved in the margin here. So every one of these votes is important. And the job of the elections officials in this office is to assure that every single legal vote is counted and that the will of the voters of the state of Georgia is met on this very, very important election. Now, Justin, you can ask your question. Okay.
When we're looking at a timeline here, we are not talking about knowing who's won this election in the next few days, are we?
Given the strong probability of a recount, we will not be able to ascertain it. Now, we're going to go through our legal processes, which means we have to certify. And I do anticipate that there could potentially be lawsuits from both the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign, depending on where they are and what they're looking at, that a judge could order the counties or the state to do different specific things. But right now, we're operating the laws of the state that we currently have, the timeline we have. We're trying to move to the risk limiting audit as fast as we can through county certification, and then following the risk limiting audit, the certification of the state, and then likely whoever is in second, their initial request for a recount.
So with all the talk about legal voting, is there any specific evidence of, for instance, illegal?
As I said earlier, in a situation where the margin is, so small, you don't need to have anything that's rampant. There's irregularities that you can see that's very, very common in nearly every election. But in this particular case, every single one of them is very important. Every insight we've gotten, every report we've gotten is going to be investigated fully. And we are working hard to protect the integrity of the vote, regardless of who makes a complaint about any of these things. We can't say that, sir, yet because they're still under investigation. Yes, sir.
Mr. Sterling, just a few hours ago, President Trump said, well, where are the missing military ballots in Georgia? What happened? How do you respond to that?
Well, we still have a few hours to see what will be coming in from the U.S. Post Office that has to be postmarked by Tuesday. So we feel like that we will have an answer to, quote unquote, not missing ballots. There are ballots that are going to make it. There's ballots that are not going to make it. And we're going to count all the legal ballots. Legal ballots have to be here at close of business today and have to have them postmarked by Election Day. Yes, ma'am.
Have any military ballots arrived here?
Well, if you notice the difference on the amounts that I said here today, we had about 17,500, give or take, yesterday. I have 18,000 today. So 500 of them have already come in the last few hours and been processed by the counties. Yes, John.
Just to clarify, do you anticipate a situation where today, tomorrow, Sunday, Monday, the Secretary of State is going to stand here and say, this candidate won and this candidate lost?
Again, we report the results from every county. At some point, the legal process continues that the counties have to certify. Once the counties certify, we look at their paperwork and make sure it is all clean and legal, and then we will certify. That is the point at which the Secretary of State would stand here or stand wherever he might and say, this is the winner of this election as it stands right now. And then we anticipate a recount coming.
And then, prior to that, will there be a point at which you'll say all the votes, all the legal votes that we know about have been counted?
The process we have is what gets us to that point. We certify. That means these are all the legal votes we have, and all the legal votes are counted. That is the legal process been set up in the state for many decades.
But that's the 13th for the counties, right?
It's the 13th for the counties, and at the outer end, the 20th for the state. Our intention and our hope, and working diligently with the counties, is that they will certify faster than that, so that we may begin the RLA process, the risk limiting audit process, so we can certify before then. So we have a little bit more time and wiggle room to deal with what we know will likely be a recount.
Just one last follow-up. I'm sorry.
Hold on.
Will there be some time between now and the 13th?
Yep, ma'am, you can go ahead.
All of the legal votes being counted has been the general message from you across the board. Even in the Secretary of State's speech this morning, that was his language as well, but this afternoon, there was an added phrase, all illegal votes will not be counted. Why the change in language?
I think it's just for clarification, because by definition, you count all legal votes means you're not counting illegal votes. Yes, ma'am.
Have the 13,000 provisional ballots been counted yet? And if not,
What they're doing right now, you have to verify all of those first. They will likely be scanned today, and they could even be part of some of the uploads we have seen today. I'm giving you the latest information we have, and I do not believe most of these have been scanned yet, because usually the intent is you don't want to go through scanning a bunch of stuff and have to do like 8 more later on. It's easier process-wise to do everything at one time than to do it in bits and pieces when you talk with a smaller amount. Yes, sir. Hold on. I know I'm getting a risk limiting audit question. This is always my geeky time.
Given the guidance on risk limiting audit and given the closeness of the presidential race, would you prefer not to do that as the RLA because that would be tantamount to a recount?
If you look, well, we're doing a recount anyway, but you're right. Unfortunately, with the way as I pointed out to you yesterday before, it's all together for me at this point. One of the rules is for ease of use to a degree. And obviously, he's pointing out that in a risk limiting audit, the point is you're trying to use the smallest number of ballots available to get you to a point of confidence that the outcome has been reached. When it's, at this point, I think it's 0.03% difference. He is correct. It would essentially be a recount, which would be extremely difficult on the counties to do. So I think that might answer the question for you itself. Yes, ma'am. Our hope would be today. They could slip into tomorrow because, again, everybody's exhausted. It's Friday. There's a Georgia game tomorrow. It's kind of a big one. We got to focus on the really important things in this state sometimes in order to recover, to be prepared for dealing with what.
One additional thing. Following up on President Trump's tweets about quote-unquote missing military ballots, deadline is actually at 5 p.m. today. Is the Secretary of State's office concerned about that misinformation continues to come out from the White House, from President Trump specifically?
Well, I think what the President Trump is trying to encourage is the hope that as many of our military heroes, men and women across the seas, have turned in their ballots and they will be arriving under the legal deadline to this state. Yes, ma'am.
ask you about military ballots. Is this 26,000 or so a pretty typical number in Georgia?
As I understand it, that's pretty normal, yes. Yes, sir.
So you said that you guys would not be
We'll come back to you in a second.
potential investigations into irregularities. Can you tell us how many you are investigating without going into specifics?
I really couldn't answer that because, frankly, I just don't know. I'll try to figure out something for you. We'll talk to Chief of Investigations. I need some water.
A quick numbers question about the provisionals. 13,000 provisionals, correct?
That's what I said, but it's probably correct. Let's see.
And I wonder.
13,012.
Are those provisional ballots that have been accepted, or you broke it down?
Now, this is all provisional ballots, accepted, not accepted, discard. I mean, there's, none of these have been, again, latest numbers we have. None of this is either for sure going to go in except the number I gave you, which was the out of precinct ones. Since everybody's ballot has president on it, all of these will go towards that, and that is 3,908. And again, we're also missing about 20 counties out of this, so that number will be bigger at the end of the day. Your follow-up.
So for your proper ballots, do you guys do a breakdown of how many are overseas and how many are military? Do you break them down at all?
They're treated the same way. Yes, sir.
Are you confident you're getting good numbers from the county because the counties, because this one you said 3,500 ballots the next county. You went out to Gwinnett and they said at least 75.
Okay, there's a difference on this particular thing because you noticed they pushed out results. What they've already uploaded, okay? And then they had a bucket of things that were the new ones that came in Tuesday, essentially. And then there were some other ones that were there from the earlier time they had to rescan. So the 7,000 is what they were scanning. but the only new votes that will be uploaded are in that 4,000 to 3,500 amount, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to try. They pushed out a little over 80,000 votes in a single upload. And there was an issue because of the adjudication where they basically said, we're going to push out the results, just the results that we have right now. We're going to rescan. It was sort of decided internally there by their elections board. They had an option A and option B of how to do this. They wanted to get the information out because that was the most important thing at the time. So,
all right, everybody, we are listening to Gabriel Sterling. He is the Votum System Implementation Manager there at the Georgia Secretary of State's office. I want to bring in right now Priscilla Thompson in Atlanta and also NBC's Mike Memley, who's been covering the Biden campaign. He joins us now from Biden headquarters at the Chase Center in Wilmington, Delaware. So, Priscilla, we're going to start with you. We got a lot of numbers thrown our way. Do you anticipate hearing any results in the next few days, today, tomorrow?
You know, Lindsay, one thing that he mentioned there is the fact that the number of ballots still needing to be counted here in the state has not changed from what they released earlier today. I think the focus now is really shifting to those military and overseas ballots. As a reminder, folks had to have those postmarked by Election Day in order to get them in, so they had up until close of business today to get those in, and there's been a lot of conversation around those today with the president tweeting, where are the missing ballots? When in fact these ballots are not missing. They have been coming in to the counties over the past several days, and today is the final day for them to do that and to get a tally on how many of those they're expecting. And one of the things that to note here, and that you heard the voter implementation manager really emphasizing, is that there are around 8,900 of those that are still outstanding, that are perhaps not yet in, and they're not sure. It's unclear if they are going to get all of those 8,900 by the deadline, but that's just sort of how it goes. Just as on Election Day, if those absentee ballots didn't get in for whatever reason by 7 p.m., they were not counted. The same thing applies here. And so you heard the Secretary of State, who spoke at the beginning, really emphasizing that people are monitoring this process. And while he is aware that the country may be watching right now to see what is going to happen in Georgia, they are really focused on taking their time and making sure there is an accurate count. And so we don't necessarily know a specific timeline on when we should expect to have more information or results, but as he said there, these results do have to be certified. November 20th is the deadline for Georgia to do that. And so we will know something at that point, and then from there we move into the conversation about a possible recount, and either candidate will have the opportunity to ask for that recount if the margin is still within that 0.5%. And one other thing that I just want to make note of here that my colleague Monica Alba reported out just a little while ago, the Trump campaign and the RNC has announced that they do have lawyers and a legal team on the ground here in Georgia prepared for any sort of challenges. And as we heard there in the presser, the Secretary of State's office saying that they do anticipate legal challenges. So things are far from over here in Georgia. Lindsay?
Yeah, so Mike, where does that leave the Biden campaign? We know that Georgia's another one of those states where Biden is pulling ahead, but the Georgia election official we just heard from said we expect a recount.
Yeah, Lindsay, every time more data comes in, it shows the former vice president gaining ground in the states that could put him over 270 electoral votes, especially Pennsylvania. The problem is that data is coming in very slowly. As recently as about 4 or 5 hours ago, the Biden team was really full speed ahead on telegraphing a speech tonight here at the convention center behind me. We've seen the Jeeps that were part of the election night scene, red, white, and blue Jeeps for a drive-in celebration return tonight. Now it's looking like they're now going to potentially have to wait again if no news organizations are able to project 270 electoral votes for Joe Biden. We won't see him here tonight. But the mood among Biden officials that we've been speaking to all day has been really jubilant. Today, they really did think, especially once Pennsylvania margin flipped from narrowly for Trump to now narrowly for Biden, that they were on a track to victory here. But the story of the week, what they've been pressing all along is patience, asking everybody to be patient about this vote count. But now everyone's patience is really being tested given the slow pace here.
All right, Priscilla Thompson in Atlanta, Mike Memley in Delaware. This just keeps changing by the hour. Appreciate both of you joining us. I believe we're going to now go on to Nevada. Again, another state where the count continues. NBC's Jacob Soboroff joining us from North Las Vegas. So Jacob, you know, I feel like we've heard John Ralston on our sister network MSNBC all day saying, why haven't media organizations called this? Doesn't sound like we have Jacob yet. We will get him for you right after the break. Stick with us. Oh, Jacob? Do you hear me? All right, we'll be right back.
Good morning. Welcome to Today. We're glad to have you with us.
This fall, we're right there with you. Whether you're back to school,
what do you guys think? We're excited?
Or back to work, we're keeping you safe.
I love being back.
Every morning on Today.
Good morning. Welcome to Today. We're glad to have you with us.
This fall, we're right there with you. Whether you're back to school,
what do you guys think? We're excited?
Or back to work, we're keeping you safe.
I love being back.
Every morning on Today.
Police murder of unarmed black men has been an American way of death across centuries. After seeing the most comprehensive police reform bill ever introduced in Congress, I've begun to wonder if now is the time. If now is the time the protesters finally win.
The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, weeknights at 10 on MSNBC.
NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
Are people there concerned about what impact this could have on the election?
It's news made for your streaming world.
Introducing the MSNBC Daily, featuring written perspectives by experts you know and trust for a better understanding of the stories that matter most. Check out the MSNBC Daily today at msnbc.com.